My name is Thomas Nakai, and I have served as a police officer with the Navajo Nation Police Department for 14 years. Before we begin, if you're enjoying these stories from law enforcement, please take a moment to subscribe and hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And I'm curious, where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your location in the comments. Also, if you've ever visited the Southwest, if you've ever stood at the edge of a canyon and felt like the earth itself was breathing beneath your feet, I need you to pay attention to what I'm about to tell you. Drop a comment. Have you ever been to Canyon de Chelly? Have you ever felt the pull of those red rock walls? Because what I'm going to share with you might save your life. In the northeast corner of Arizona, where the Defiance Plateau breaks into a labyrinth of sandstone canyons, there exists a place we call Tsé Bii, but you know it as Canyon de Chelly. It stretches for roughly 26 miles from east to west, with walls that rise over 1,000 feet in some places. But there is a tributary canyon, a place 6.7 miles north of Spider Rock, where the walls narrow to just 40 feet across and the shadows never fully leave even at noon. We call it Tsé Bii Ndzisgaii, the place where the stone swallows. My grandfather called it something else. He called it the breathing place. What I am about to tell you goes against every oath I swore when I put on this badge. The Navajo Nation Police, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the National Park Service, they would all prefer this story stayed buried in the red dust. But after what happened on September 15th, 2024, after we lost 3 more people, and I learned the truth about what my grandfather tried to warn me about for 30 years, I can no longer remain silent. Everyone has the right to know what is really happening in the canyon walls of Tsé Bii Ndzisgaii. Before that night last September, I would have told you I was a rational man. I graduated from the police academy in Artesia, New Mexico, spent 2 years as a patrol officer in Chinle, worked my way up to criminal investigator. I've dealt with domestic violence cases, drug trafficking operations running out of Gallup and Farmington, missing persons, homicides, suicides. I've seen the worst of what human beings can do to each other. I've worked cases that kept me up for days, that made me question my faith, that showed me depths of cruelty I didn't know existed. But I always operated within a framework of logic. Evidence, testimony, forensics, cause and effect. The world made sense, even when it was brutal, even when it was tragic. My grandfather, Thomas Nakai, was a Hatali, a traditional medicine man, a singer of the Blessing Way and Enemy Way ceremonies. He passed away 7 years ago at the age of 94, still sharp, still walking the land, still performing ceremonies for families who came from as far as Monument Valley and Shiprock to receive his healing. When I was a child, maybe 7 or 8 years old, he took me out to the edge of Tsé Bii Ndzisgaii. This was before the Park Service put up the signs and the visitor restrictions. We walked along the rim in the early morning, when the light was still blue and cold, and the canyon was filled with layers of shadow that looked solid enough to walk on. He pointed down into that narrow split in the earth, where the walls came so close together that they nearly touched, where the cottonwood trees at the bottom looked like tiny green brushstrokes. He said to me in Navajo, which I will translate for you, "Grandson, you see that place down there, where the stone comes together? That is a holy place, but not in the way the white tourists think when they use that word. It is holy because it is a door. The earth breathes there. You can hear it if you listen. In and out, in and out, like lungs. But what breathes through that door is not air. It is time itself. The old ones knew this. They built dwellings in those walls, not to hide from enemies, but to watch, to keep guard, to make sure the door stayed closed, or at least controlled. There are rules, grandson. Rules older than the Diné, older than the Anasazi who came before us, older than the people who came before them whose names are lost. Never enter the breathing place between sunset and sunrise. Never speak your true name while you stand on the threshold. Never break stone or shed blood within the canyon walls. And most important, never try to measure time there. Because time there does not flow the way it flows up here. Time there pools. It eddies. It flows backward and forward and sideways all at once. Do you understand? I nodded, the way children do when they want to please their grandparents, but don't really grasp what's being said. I understood the words. I didn't understand the truth. He continued, "There will come a time when people will not listen to these rules. They will bring their machines and their cameras and their need to explain everything, to categorize everything, to own everything. They will think the rules are superstition, old stories, meaningless tradition. And when they break the rules, the door will open wider. What waits on the other side will come through. And someone will have to stand in the gap. Someone will have to become the watcher. It might be you, grandson. You have the gift. I see it in your eyes. You see more than you should already. When the time comes, you will understand. I remember feeling cold despite the summer heat. I remember the way the canyon seemed to shift and breathe even as we stood still. The way the shadows moved independent of the sun. But I was 7 years old. By the time I was in high school, I had learned to dismiss my grandfather's warnings as folklore. Beautiful, meaningful to our culture, important to preserve, but not literally true. Not real in the way physics was real, the way biology was real. I went to college at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, studied criminal justice, learned about evidence-based reasoning and the scientific method. I became the kind of Navajo who respects tradition while living in the modern world. I performed the ceremonies when my family asked. I avoided the taboos when it was easy, but I didn't believe. Not really. Not until September 15th, 2024. The call came in at 3:47 in the afternoon. I was in the station in Chinle, finishing up paperwork on a burglary case, drinking coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, looking forward to going home to my wife and daughter. The dispatcher, Betty Yazzie, called me over to her desk. She had that look on her face that I'd learned to recognize over the years. The look that meant something was wrong, in a way that couldn't be easily categorized. "Tommy, we've got a situation out at the canyon. Park Service is requesting tribal police assistance. They've got a group of archaeologists from the University of New Mexico who were supposed to report back to the ranger station at 2 o'clock. They didn't show. Last known location was Tsé Bii Ndzisgaii, the narrow tributary north of Spider Rock." My stomach dropped. I hadn't thought about that place, really thought about it, in years. My grandfather had been dead for 7 years. His warnings had faded to the background static of childhood memories. "How many people?" I asked. "6. Professor Marcus Webb, the lead archaeologist, 3 graduate students, and 2 guides from the Navajo Nation, Lawrence Begay and Daniel Tsinagini. You know them?" I did. Lawrence was my second cousin on my mother's side. Daniel had gone to high school with my younger brother. Both were experienced guides who led tourist groups into the canyon regularly. Both knew the land, knew the stories, knew the rules. What were they doing in Tsé Bii Ndzisgaii with archaeologists? What were they doing there? I asked. Betty pulled up the permit on her computer. Archaeological Survey. University of New Mexico got permission from both the Navajo Nation Historic Preservation Department and the Park Service. They're documenting ancestral Puebloan sites, looking for evidence of occupation patterns between 1200 and 1300 AD. They had a permit for ground-penetrating radar and photogrammetry. They were supposed to stay on the canyon floor. No climbing, no excavation, just documentation. Ground-penetrating radar, photogrammetry. Modern technology trying to measure and map and categorize a place where, if my grandfather was to be believed, time itself didn't follow normal rules. Never try to measure time there. The memory came back with perfect clarity. My grandfather's voice. The cold feeling in my stomach despite the summer heat. I grabbed my keys and my radio. Tell the Park Service I'm on my way. Estimated arrival is 45 minutes. Contact Sale Police and see if we can get additional units for a search party. If they're not back by sunset, we're going to need lights and equipment. Betty nodded, already, reaching for the phone. I walked out to my unit, a white Chevrolet Tahoe with Navajo Nation Police, stenciled on the side in turquoise and red. The sky was that deep, endless blue you only get in high desert country. Not a cloud anywhere. The temperature was 83 degrees. Perfect weather for a canyon hike. Perfect weather for a tragedy. The drive north from Chinle took me along Indian Route 7, past the Junction School and the cottonwood groves that marked underground water. Past hogans, both occupied and abandoned. Past sheep, grazing the sparse grass. I could see the rim of Canyon de Chelly rising to my right, the layered sandstone glowing orange and red in the afternoon light. Tourist vehicles dotted the overlook parking areas. White Rim, Sliding House, Spider Rock. All the famous viewpoints where people could stand safely behind railings and take photographs of the ancient dwellings built into cliff faces 700 years ago, where they could marvel at the ingenuity of the ancestral Puebloans and feel a pleasant sense of historical connection before getting back in their air-conditioned cars and driving to the next scenic spot. None of them had any idea what they were really looking at. My radio crackled. Nakai, this is Yazzie. I've got Park Ranger Melissa Goodman on the line for you. She's at the Spider Rock Overlook. Says she needs to talk to you before you proceed to the search area. I keyed the mic. Patch her through. There was a moment of static, then a woman's voice, tight with controlled stress. Officer Nakai, this is Ranger Goodman. I was the one who issued the permit to Dr. Webb's team. I need you to know something before you head down into the canyon. This isn't the first incident we've had at Tsé Bii Ndzisgaii. I felt that cold sensation in my stomach again. What do you mean? 3 years ago, we had a group of rock climbers who wanted to do a technical ascent of the north wall. They had all the proper permits, all the proper equipment. Experienced climbers, very respectful of the tribal regulations. They went in at 9 a.m. on a clear day in June. They were due out at 4 p.m. We found them at 11 p.m. that night, all 5 of them, sitting at the base of the wall in a circle, holding hands, staring up at the rock face. They wouldn't speak. They wouldn't move. We had to physically carry them out. 2 of them required hospitalization for severe dehydration and hypothermia. even though the ambient temperature never dropped below 70 degrees that day. One of them never regained the ability to speak coherently. The other four refused to talk about what happened. All of them had identical marks on their palms, like frostbite, but in a perfect handprint pattern, as if they'd gripped something incredibly cold. Why wasn't this reported more widely? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Because the Park Service and the tribal government made a joint decision to classify it as a medical emergency rather than an anomalous event. Heat, exhaustion, dehydration, possible hallucinogenic plant exposure. That was the official report. And to be honest, we thought maybe that was it. Canyon de Chelly has sacred datura growing all over. Maybe they'd accidentally contaminated their water. Maybe they'd touched the plant and absorbed alkaloids through their skin. It was easier to believe that than the alternative. What's the alternative? I asked, though again, I knew. My grandfather's voice echoed in my memory. The door will open wider. That there's something in that canyon, Ranger Goodman said quietly. Something that doesn't follow normal rules. I've been a park ranger for 22 years. I've worked at Yellowstone, Zion, Grand Canyon, Joshua Tree. I've seen heat exhaustion, altitude sickness, animal attacks, falls, lightning strikes. I've seen what happens when people underestimate nature. This isn't that. This is something else. The rangers who have worked here long enough, we know. We don't go into Tsé Bii Ndzisgaii. The old-timers in the Navajo Nation, they know too. They just call it by different names. But the universities keep requesting permits, and the governments keep issuing them, because to deny them would be to officially acknowledge that something impossible is happening, and no one wants to do that. I'm still 10 minutes out, I said. Where should I meet you? Spider Rock Overlook. We're staging there. But Officer Nakai, before you go down, talk to your elders. Talk to the medicine people. They know things we don't. She didn't know my grandfather was dead. She didn't know I'd spent the last 25 years dismissing his warnings. She didn't know I was about to learn that everything he'd told me was not metaphor or folklore or superstitious tradition. It was field manual. It was operational procedure. It was a warning label on a door I was about to walk through. I pulled into the Spider Rock Overlook parking area at 4:32 p.m. 2 Park Service vehicles, 1 BIA truck, and a Navajo Nation emergency response van were already there. The Overlook was mostly empty of tourists. A few people lingered near the railings with cameras, but most had moved on to catch sunset at other viewpoints. Spider Rock itself rose 800 feet from the canyon floor, like a finger pointing at the sky. Dark red sandstone striated with lighter bands, sacred to the Diné as the home of Spider-Woman, who taught the people to weave. It was beautiful and alien and ancient. Ranger Goodman was a white woman in her 50s. Gray hair pulled back in a ponytail, face weathered from decades of outdoor work. She shook my hand with a grip that was firm and dry. Her eyes were the kind of gray that looked like they'd seen too much. Officer Nakai, thank you for coming. We're assembling a search team, but I wanted to brief you first. We've been calling down on the radio for the last 2 hours. No response. We've tried the cell phones. Nothing. According to the GPS trackers on their equipment. She paused, pulled out a tablet, showed me a screen with a topographic map overlay. 6 dots clustered together in the narrow section of Tsé Bii Ndzisgaii. They're all still there. All 6 GPS units are reporting from the same location. But here's the problem. She zoomed in on the display. According to the timestamps, those GPS units are reporting their positions correctly, but they're reporting time signatures that are wrong. What do you mean wrong? She turned the tablet so I could see the data more clearly. Each GPS unit had a timestamp. All 6 showed the current date, September 15th, 2024. But the times were different. One showed 11:23 a.m., one showed 6:47 p.m., one showed 2:15 a.m., one showed 9:03 a.m., September 16th. One showed 3:58 p.m., September 14th. One showed a time and date that made my hands go cold, 3:33 a.m., June 7th, 1953. That's impossible, I said. But even as I said it, I felt the certainty crumbling. Never try to measure time there, because time there does not flow the way it flows up here. We thought it was a malfunction, Ranger Goodman said. Multiple simultaneous malfunctions. But then we checked the equipment logs. These are high-end GPS units with military-grade atomic clocks. The probability of all 6 failing in this specific way, showing different but internally consistent time signatures, is astronomically small. And there's something else. She pulled up another screen. This one showed altitude data. According to the GPS readings, all 6 units are at different elevations. One is at the canyon floor, 420 feet above sea level. One is 200 feet above the canyon floor. One is 150 feet below the canyon floor, which would put it underground. The others are scattered across a vertical range of 600 feet. But according to their lateral positions, they're all standing within a 20-foot circle of each other. I stared at the data. My training told me this was a technical malfunction. Multiple equipment failures creating meaningless noise. But the cold certainty in my gut told me something different. They were all standing in the same place, but they were standing in different times, different layers, different versions of the same place folded on top of each other, like pages in a book. I need to go down there, I said. Ranger Goodman looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Pity, maybe, or recognition. I was hoping you'd say that, but I need to tell you something first. After the incident 3 years ago, I started researching. I went through old Park Service records, BIA files, anything I could find about incidents in this specific area. I found 14 separate missing persons cases dating back to 1923. That's when the record keeping becomes reliable. Before that, who knows? Of those 14 cases, 11 people were eventually found. All of them were found exactly where they disappeared, hours or sometimes days later, with no memory of the elapsed time. All of them reported the same thing. The walls were breathing. The stone was moving. Time felt thick, like walking through water. And all of them had marks, burns or frostbite or both, always on their hands, always in the shape of handprints. What about the 3 who weren't found? I asked. One was a Navajo man named Joe Yazzie, disappeared in 1953. Never found. One was a photographer from New York City named Robert Chambers, disappeared in 1967. Never found. One was a French anthropologist named Dr. Claire Beaumont, disappeared in 1989. Never found. And here's what connects them. All 3 disappeared on dates corresponding to solstices or equinoxes. Joe Yazzie, June 7th, 1953. Summer solstice was June 21st that year, but June 7th was 14 days before, and 14 is significant in Navajo numerology. Robert Chambers, September 22nd, 1967. Autumnal equinox. Dr. Beaumont, March 20th, 1989. Spring equinox. June 7th, 1953. The date showing on one of the GPS units. We're 6 days past the autumnal equinox, I said. Yes. Ranger Goodman closed her tablet. I'm not going to stop you from going down there. You're a grown man and a sworn officer. but I need you to know what you're walking into. The old-timers, the Navajo Rangers who've been here for 30, 40 years, they won't go into Tsé Bii Ndzisgaii. They'll tell you it's because of the sacred nature of the place, the respect for the ancestors, and that's part of it. But it's also because they know whatever is in that canyon, it doesn't operate by our rules. And if you go down there, you might not come back the same person who went in. I thought about my grandfather. I thought about his warnings. I thought about Lawrence Begay and Daniel Sinigini, both good men with families, both experienced guides who would never take unnecessary risks. I thought about the 3 graduate students whose names I didn't even know yet. Young people pursuing knowledge with no idea they'd walked into something far older and stranger than any archaeological site. I'm going, I said. I'll need rappelling equipment, high-powered lights, extra batteries, water, first aid, and at least 2 people for support on the rim. I want constant radio contact. If I'm not back by full dark, send in a full search and rescue team with floodlights. We can do that, Ranger Goodman said. But Officer Nakai, one more thing. The people who came back from that canyon 3 years ago, the ones who survived, they all said the same thing. They said the walls whispered to them, in languages they didn't understand, in voices that sounded like stone grinding against stone. And they all said that something offered them a choice: to go deeper, to understand, to see what was really there, or to close their eyes and wait for rescue. The ones who closed their eyes came back. I don't know what happened to the ones who looked. I'll keep that in mind, I said, though I already knew I wouldn't be able to close my eyes. My grandfather's words came back to me. You have the gift. I see it in your eyes. You see more than you should already. When the time comes, you will understand. The time had come, and I was about to understand. The descent into Tsé Bii Ndzisgaii took 40 minutes. The rim-to-floor trail was steep and loose, switchbacking down through layers of Entrada sandstone, Kayenta Formation, Wingate sandstone, older and older rock as I descended, moving backward through geological time. 280 million years of compressed sediment and ancient seas and wind-blown dunes turned to stone. The walls rose around me like the sides of a wound in the earth. The cottonwood trees at the bottom were already in shadow, though the sky above was still bright blue. The temperature dropped as I descended. By the time I reached the canyon floor, it was noticeably cooler, maybe 15 degrees colder than the rim. My breath misted slightly in the air, which made no sense. It was still September. It was still 83 degrees up above. But down here, the laws were different. I radioed to Ranger Goodman. Nakai on canyon floor. Temperature approximately 68 degrees. No visual contact with the missing persons yet. Proceeding north toward last known GPS position. Copy that, Nakai. We have your signal. You're coming through clear. The canyon floor was sandy, broken by clumps of rabbit brush and tamarisk. A small stream, barely more than a trickle, ran down the center, fed by runoff from distant rainfall. Ancient cottonwoods lined the watercourse, their leaves turning gold. The walls on either side rose sheer and smooth, marked with desert varnish, that dark patina of manganese and iron oxides that accumulates over centuries. I could see cliff dwellings in alcoves high above, T-shaped doorways and small windows looking down like empty eye sockets. My grandfather had told me stories about those dwellings, how the ancient people built them, not just for shelter or defense, but for observation, to watch. to keep guard. I walked north, following the GPS coordinates on my phone. The canyon narrowed with each step. The walls leaned in. The strip of sky above became a ribbon, then a thread. The light turned blue and strange, reflected and re-reflected off the sandstone, until it seemed to come from the rock itself rather than the sun. I could hear my footsteps echoing, but the echoes came back wrong, too late, or too early, overlapping in ways that didn't match my rhythm. After 10 minutes of walking, I reached the place where the canyon narrowed to just 40 feet across. Here the walls were vertical, even slightly overhanging in places. The stream disappeared underground. The sand was smooth and undisturbed, except for a single set of recent boot prints leading deeper into the narrow section. I followed them. The air smelled wrong. Not bad, just wrong. Like ozone and copper and something else I couldn't identify. Something ancient. The walls around me were marked with petroglyphs, spirals, and human figures, and geometric patterns carved by hands that had turned to dust centuries ago. But as I looked closer, I realized some of the petroglyphs weren't carved. They were burned, scorched, as if someone had pressed patterns into the rock with intense heat. And some of them were recent, not centuries old, days old, maybe hours. I stopped walking. I keyed my radio. Nakai to base. I'm seeing anomalous markings on the canyon walls. Some appear to be thermally created, recent, no sign of the missing persons yet. The radio hissed static. Then Ranger Goodman's voice came through, but distant, distorted. Copy. On 'em. Markings. Repeat. Last. Base, you're breaking up. Can you hear me? Here. Faint. Temporal interference. Reading. The radio dissolved into static. I checked my phone. No signal. Not even the searching indicator. Just a blank space where the signal bar should be. The GPS was still working, but the timestamp was flickering. 5:42 p.m., September 15th, 2024. Then 3:17 a.m., September 16th, 2024. Then 11:05 a.m., September 15th, 2024. Then 3:33 a.m., June 7th, 1953. The numbers cycled through variations, never stable, never consistent. Never try to measure time there. I kept walking. Ahead, the canyon bent to the left, disappearing around a blind corner. The boot prints led that way. I followed, and as I turned the corner, I saw them. All 6 missing persons. Standing in a circle in the center of the narrow canyon, holding hands, staring up at the walls, not moving. Dr. Marcus Webb, I recognized from the photo on the university website. A man in his 50s, gray beard, wire-rimmed glasses now hanging askew on his face. The 3 graduate students were younger, 2 men and a woman, all in their 20s, all wearing field gear, all standing perfectly still. And Lawrence Begay and Daniel Tsé Bii Ndzisgaii, both men I knew. Both guides I'd shared meals with. Both fathers and husbands and members of the community. All 6 of them. Holding hands in a circle, eyes open, not blinking, staring up at the canyon walls as if reading something written there in a language I couldn't see. "Lawrence!" I shouted. "Daniel!" No response. I ran forward, breaking through the circle, grabbing Lawrence by the shoulders. His eyes didn't move. His body was cold. Not corpse cold. Something else. A cold that went deeper than temperature. A cold that felt like absence. Like void. His lips moved. Barely. A whisper so faint, I had to lean in to hear. "The walls are breathing, Tommy. Can you hear it? In and out. In and out. The door is opening. We're standing in all the times at once. Do you understand? We're here now. We're here in 1953. We're here in 1300. We're here in 300. We're here in 10,000 years from now, when the sun is red and huge, and the people are gone, and only the canyon remains. We're standing in the same place, but the place is standing in different times. The stone remembers everything. The stone is showing us. We've been here for 3 hours. We've been here for 3 days. We've been here for 71 years. All of it is true. All of it is happening right now. Right here. The old ones knew. They tried to warn us, but we brought our machines. We tried to measure. We tried to map. And when we did, we opened it wider. The door. It was always open a crack. But now, it's open wide. And they're coming through. Who's coming through, I asked. But I knew. I'd always known. My grandfather's stories. The beings who lived in the spaces between times. The guardians. The watchers. The ones who existed in all moments simultaneously. I looked up at the canyon walls. The petroglyphs were moving. Not moving. That's wrong. They were always moving. I just hadn't been able to see it before. The spirals were rotating. The human figures were walking. The geometric patterns were shifting and recombining like kaleidoscopes. And there were other patterns appearing now. Patterns that hadn't been there before, burning themselves into the stone as I watched. Equations. Not mathematical equations I could understand, but something deeper. Relationships. Connections. The fundamental grammar of how time works when it's not flowing in a line, but pooling and eddying and moving in all directions at once. Lawrence, I need you to let go of their hands, I said. I need you to come back. Your wife is waiting. Your daughter is waiting. You have to come back. His eyes slowly, so slowly, turned to look at me. When they did, I saw that his pupils were wrong. They weren't circular. They were spiral, spinning, reflecting light that wasn't coming from any visible source. Tommy, he whispered, your grandfather sent us to find you. Not here, not now, but 14 years ago, and also tomorrow, and also in 1953. He's been waiting for you. He's been standing at the threshold. He became one of the watchers when he died. Or maybe he was always one of the watchers, and dying just let him stop pretending to be only in one time. He says you're ready now. He says it's your turn to choose. You can close your eyes. You can wait for rescue. You can go back to the world where time is a line, and the past is gone, and the future hasn't happened yet. Or you can open your eyes all the way. You can see what he sees, what we see, what the old ones have always seen. The stone remembers everything, Tommy. Everyone who has ever stood here. Everyone who will ever stand here. All of them existing in this same space, just at different frequencies, like radio stations. You can choose to hear only one station, or you can choose to hear all of them at once. I felt something on my chest, a coldness spreading. I looked down and saw a handprint appearing on my shirt, frost forming in the shape of fingers, spreading across my ribs, reaching toward my heart. It didn't hurt. It felt like recognition, like something I'd always carried was finally becoming visible. The choice is simple, Lawrence said, and now his voice had harmonics, layers, as if multiple people were speaking through him at once. Stay in the line, or become the circle. Stay in one moment, or exist in all moments. But know this, if you choose to see, you cannot unsee. If you choose to become the watcher, you will watch forever, or until someone comes to relieve you. There are worse fates. There are better ones, but there are none more necessary. The door must be guarded. The threshold must be maintained. The old ones did this work for thousands of years before the Diné came to this land. The Diné have done this work for centuries, and now the work comes to you. The cold handprint spread. My chest felt heavy. My vision blurred, and then suddenly clarified, and I could see them. The other people. The other times. Standing in the same space I was standing. A man in 1953, wearing clothes from that era. Park Service uniform, standing exactly where I was standing, looking around in confused terror. A woman in buckskin and turquoise, centuries ago, standing where I was standing, performing a ceremony, sprinkling corn pollen, singing. A child thousands of years ago, standing where I was standing, watching someone paint the first petroglyphs. An old man, hundreds of years in the future, standing where I was standing, in a canyon much deeper, much older. Walls eroded further, sky a strange color, recording something on a device I couldn't understand. All of them standing in the same place. All of them existing in different times. All of them visible to me now. All of them real. My radio suddenly crackled to life, but the voice coming through wasn't Ranger Goodman. It was my grandfather. Grandson, you're hearing me because you're standing on the threshold. I've been waiting for you. Not waiting the way people wait for a bus. Waiting the way a place waits for the right person to arrive. I am here. I am in 2017 at the moment of my death. I am in 1952 as a young man. I am in 2024 as a spirit. I am in all of these times because I chose to become a watcher, and now I'm offering you the same choice. The door is opening wider because the world is changing. More technology, more measurement, more people who think time is a resource to be controlled rather than a gift to be respected. They're making the door unstable. Soon, it will open completely. And when it does, all the times will collapse into each other. Past and future and present will merge. The canyon will become a wound in reality, unless someone stands guard, unless someone maintains the threshold. Your family will mourn you. They will say you died in the line of duty. Or they will say you disappeared. Or they will say you had a breakdown and left. But you will know the truth. You will be here. You will be everywhere and everywhen in this canyon. You will be the stone, and the stone will be you. You will remember everything, everyone, every moment. You will be the guardian, the watcher, the one who keeps the door from opening completely until someone comes to relieve you, or until the door closes naturally, which will take centuries, maybe millennia. This is the burden my grandfather carried, and his grandfather before him, and now I'm offering it to you. But it is an offer, grandson. You can refuse. You can close your eyes. You can wait for rescue. You can go back to your family. Someone else will eventually stand at this threshold. Maybe not in your lifetime. Maybe not for generations. But eventually, someone will. And the door will remain unstable until they do. Or, his voice paused. I could hear the breathing of the canyon walls. In and out, in and out. Or you can accept. You can open your eyes all the way. You can see what I see. And you can join me in the work. It is terrible work. It is beautiful work. It is the most important work that has ever existed. And you were born to do it. I knew it the moment I first held you. You have the gift, the sight, the ability to exist in multiple times without losing yourself. That is rare, grandson. That is precious. That is necessary. I stood there, feeling the cold handprint spreading across my chest, watching the petroglyphs move, seeing the overlapping figures of people from different times standing in the same space, hearing my grandfather's voice coming from a radio that was receiving signals from 2017 and 1952 and 2024 all at once. I thought about my wife, Sarah, my daughter, Nina, 9 years old, who loved horses and wanted to be a veterinarian. My son, who had died 3 years ago, stillborn. A grief I carried every day. My mother, who was getting older, who needed help with the sheep. My community, who trusted me to protect them. I thought about all of that. And then I thought about what would happen if I said no, if I closed my eyes and waited for rescue. Someone else would eventually come. Someone else would eventually stand at this threshold. And they might not be ready. They might not have the gift. They might not be strong enough. And the door would open completely, and all the times would collapse into each other, and the canyon would become a wound that would spread across the land, across the world, across reality itself. How do you make a choice like that? How do you weigh your own life against the stability of time itself? I looked at Lawrence Begay. I looked at Daniel Sinagini. I looked at the graduate students and Dr. Webb, all of them standing in the circle, all of them seeing what I was seeing now. And I understood that they had already made their choice. They had looked. They had seen. And they couldn't unsee. They would have to be carried out. They would spend the rest of their lives trying to explain what they'd experienced, and no one would believe them. They would be diagnosed with shared psychosis, trauma-induced hallucination, heat exhaustion, contamination. They would lose their careers, their relationships, their grip on the consensus reality that most people inhabit. Or they would choose to stop speaking about it. They would carry the knowledge alone. They would wake up at 3:33 a.m. for the rest of their lives, hearing the canyon walls, breathing, feeling the handprint on their chest growing colder, knowing that somewhere in the desert, a door was opening wider. But they would be alive. They would be in one time. They would be with their families. I could have that, or I could choose something else. I looked up at the canyon walls. I looked at the moving petroglyphs. I looked at the overlapping figures of people from different times. And I made my choice. I opened my eyes all the way. The moment I made the choice, everything changed. Not all at once. Gradually. Like walking from a dark room into bright sunlight, letting your eyes adjust. The cold handprint on my chest stopped spreading. It began to pulse. Each pulse sent ripples through my body, through my awareness, through my sense of where I ended and the world began. I could feel the canyon breathing. Not metaphorically, actually. The walls expanding and contracting by fractions of inches. The air pressure changing. The temperature fluctuating, in and out, in and out. The rhythm of it matched my heartbeat, or my heartbeat matched it. I couldn't tell which anymore. I looked down at my hands. They were translucent. I could see the bones inside, the blood vessels, the tendons. I could also see them as they had been when I was 7 years old, standing at the rim with my grandfather. I could see them as they would be when I was 80, if I lived that long, liver spotted and bent with arthritis. I could see all the versions of my hands existing simultaneously, overlapping, real. I looked up at Lawrence Begay. He was smiling. Or the part of him that was still here, still in September 2024, was smiling. "You did it," he said. "You opened your eyes. Your grandfather knew you would. We all knew. That's why we came here. Not the others. Me and Daniel. We were asked to bring the archaeologists here on this date because you needed to be called. You needed to have a reason to come to the canyon. You needed to be standing in exactly this spot at exactly this time. And here you are. You knew, I said. My voice sounded strange, layered. You brought them here to trap them. Not trap, Daniel Tsé Bii Ndzisgaii said. His voice also had harmonics now. To witness, to testify. They will go back. They will tell the story. No one will believe them, but some will wonder. And wondering is enough. Wondering keeps the door from being forgotten completely. Your grandfather taught us this before he died, or before he transformed, or both. The door must be guarded, but the door must also be remembered. Otherwise, more people come with their machines and their need to understand. Better to let a few people see and speak and be dismissed than to have hundreds stumble through accidentally. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to feel betrayed. But I couldn't, because I could see the logic of it, the terrible, necessary logic. And I could see something else now. I could see the green journal tucked into Lawrence's backpack, a journal I recognized, my grandfather's journal. The one he'd kept for 60 years, the one that documented every incident at Tsé Bii Ndzisgaii, going back to 1952. Every missing person, every strange occurrence, every time someone stood at the threshold and had to choose. Lawrence reached into his backpack and pulled out the journal. He handed it to me. The leather cover was soft with age and handling. The pages inside were filled with my grandfather's neat, small handwriting. Entries in English and Navajo. Dates going back decades. Read it later, Lawrence said, when you've adjusted. When you've learned to exist in one time while seeing all times. It gets easier. Not easy, but easier. Your grandfather managed it for 7 years after his death. Or transformation. Before he fully transitioned. You'll manage it too. You're stronger than you know. What happens to you now? I asked. To all of you? We go back, Lawrence said. We're already going back. Can't you see? We're here in the canyon, in the narrow section, at 5:47 p.m. on September 15th, 2024. We're also being carried out on stretchers at 11:23 p.m. We're also sitting in hospitals, in Flagstaff and Gallup being evaluated by psychiatrists. We're also 5 years in the future, living our lives, carrying the memory, waking up at night when the canyon calls. All of it is happening right now. You're seeing it because you're standing at the threshold. We're experiencing it because we look too long, but we'll be okay. Mostly. The human mind is remarkably adaptable. We'll learn to filter. We'll learn to see only one time again, mostly, except when we're dreaming or when we come back to the canyon. And we will come back. Once you've stood at the threshold, you're connected to it forever. The 6 of them began to move. Slowly. Still holding hands in their circle. They walked past me, around me, through the narrow section of the canyon, toward the wider area where the search and rescue teams would find them in a few hours. Or had already found them. Or were finding them right now. I watched them go. I watched their overlapping selves, the multiple timelines they were experiencing simultaneously. I could see them as children, as old people, as corpses, as spirits, all of them existing at once. And then I turned my attention back to the canyon walls. The petroglyphs were still moving, but now I could read them, not with my eyes, with something deeper. They weren't just pictures. They were records, logs, documentation. Every person who had ever stood at this threshold, every watcher who had ever accepted the burden, going back thousands of years, hundreds of watchers, thousands of watchers, all of them still here, in a sense, all of them existing in the stone, in the memory of the place, in the continuous present that the canyon inhabited. I saw my grandfather among them, not as he had been when he died at 94, but as he had been at every age, young and old and middle-aged all at once. He was standing next to an older woman I didn't recognize. She was wearing traditional Navajo clothing from the 19th century. Next to her was a man in ancestral Puebloan garb from 7 centuries ago. Next to him was someone even older, someone whose clothing and tools I didn't recognize, from a culture that had lived here before the Puebloans, before the basket makers, before recorded history began. The line of watchers stretched back into the stone, into the past, into the moment when the first humans discovered this place and realized what it was. A door, a threshold, a place where time pooled and eddied and could be accessed in ways it couldn't be accessed anywhere else. My grandfather stepped forward out of the wall. Or he had always been standing there, and I just hadn't been able to see him until now. Or both. "Grandson," he said, "welcome. You are the latest in a line of guardians that stretches back to the beginning. You will not be the last. But you are the one who is here now, and that is what matters." "How long?" I asked. "How long do I stand here?" "As long as necessary," he said. "Time is flexible here, remember? You will experience it as years, decades, perhaps centuries. But when you finally step away, when someone comes to relieve you, only days or weeks will have passed in the outer world. That is the mercy of this place. That is why the burden is bearable. You will not watch your family age and die while you remain unchanged. You will step away and find them still young, still alive, still waiting for you. Or you will choose to remain forever, and they will mourn your disappearance, but they will live good lives. The choice remains yours, always. That is the gift of the threshold. Those who stand here do so by choice, not by compulsion." I looked around the narrow canyon. I could see it now in all its iterations, as it had been 10,000 years ago when glaciers melted and water first carved this channel. As it was now, dry and narrow and sacred. As it would be thousands of years from now when the walls had eroded further and the sky had changed color and the sun was older and redder. All of it existing simultaneously, all of it real. I could see the people, all the people who had ever walked through this canyon, all the people who ever would walk through it. Tourists and archaeologists and ranchers and medicine people and children and elders. All of them walking through, most of them unaware of the door, unaware of the threshold, unaware that they were passing through a place where time itself was negotiable. But some of them aware, some of them sensitive, some of them stopping and looking around and feeling the wrongness, the strangeness, the sense that the walls were breathing and the stone was remembering and time was not flowing the way it should. And I understood now that my job, the job of the watcher, was not to stop people from entering. It was to make sure the door didn't open so wide that all the times collapsed into each other. To maintain the threshold, to keep the walls breathing in rhythm, to be the anchor point around which time could eddy and pool without creating a whirlpool that would drag everything down. "How do I do it?" I asked my grandfather. "How do I maintain the threshold?" "You already know," he said. "You've always known. You learn to exist in multiple times simultaneously without losing yourself. You learn to be here in the present while also being aware of the past and future. You learn to listen to the breathing of the walls and adjust your own breathing to match. You become part of the place. The place becomes part of you. You are the stone, and the stone is you. The separation between self and canyon dissolves. You become the threshold itself. Not a person standing at a threshold, not a guard at a gate. You become the gate, the boundary, the membrane between one state and another. And in doing so, you stabilize it. You give it consciousness. You give it intention. You prevent it from tearing open randomly and catastrophically. That sounds like death, I said. That sounds like I stopped being me. It sounds like transformation, my grandfather corrected. You don't stop being Thomas Nakai. You become more than Thomas Nakai. You become Thomas Nakai and also the canyon. You become an individual and also part of something larger. It is not death. It is expansion. But yes, the person you were before will change. Will have to change. The question is whether you can accept that change, whether you can let go of the small self to become the large self, whether you can sacrifice the limited existence for the expanded one. I thought about my wife Sarah again, my daughter Nina, my family, my job, my life as I had known it. And I realized something. I had already made the choice. The moment I opened my eyes, the moment I saw the overlapping timelines, the moment I felt the handprint on my chest and didn't reject it, I had already made the choice. Now I just had to follow through. I'm ready, I said, or at least I'm willing to try. My grandfather smiled, or the version of him that was here smiled, or all the versions of him across all times smiled simultaneously. Then let go, he said. Let the threshold take you. Let yourself dissolve into it. Don't resist. Don't hold on to the boundaries of yourself too tightly. Trust that you will not disappear. Trust that you will become something larger. Trust the process. Your ancestors have been doing this for thousands of years. The knowledge is in your blood, in your bones, in the oldest parts of your brain. Let it rise. Let it guide you. I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath. I felt the cold handprint on my chest pulse in time with the breathing of the canyon walls. In and out, in and out. And I let go. What happened next is difficult to describe in linear language because it didn't happen linearly. Time became something I could move through the way I had once moved through space. The past wasn't behind me. The future wasn't ahead of me. They were all around me, accessible, present, real. I was standing in Tsé Bii Ndzisgaii in September 2024. I was also standing in the same place in June 1953, watching Joe Yazzie disappear into the stone. I was standing in the same place in 1300, watching ancestral Puebloans perform a ceremony at the threshold, singing in a language that would die out centuries later. I was standing in the same place in the year 8000 BCE, watching the first humans discover the canyon, watching them feel the strangeness of it, watching them decide to mark it with red ochre handprints. I was standing in the same place in the year 3500, watching the canyon crumble slowly back into the earth, watching the planet itself age and change, watching the continuum of time stretch out in both directions into eternity. I was all of these things at once. I was Thomas Nakai, 38 years old, Navajo Nation Police officer, husband, father of one living child and one dead child, son, grandson, human being with hopes and fears and memories and dreams. I was also something else, something larger, something that existed across time the way a tree exists across space, with roots in the past and branches in the future and a trunk in the present. I was the threshold. And it was terrible and beautiful and overwhelming and peaceful all at once. The human part of me wanted to scream, wanted to reject this expansion of consciousness, this dissolution of boundaries, this loss of the familiar limited self. But the deeper part of me, the part that my grandfather had recognized when I was 7 years old, the part that had always been able to see more than I should, that part welcomed it. That part had been waiting for this my entire life. I could see the patterns now. I could see why certain dates were significant. The equinoxes and solstices weren't arbitrary. They were moments when the Earth's orientation to the sun created subtle shifts in gravitational fields, in magnetic fields, in the relationship between matter and energy. And those shifts affected the threshold, made it more permeable, more unstable. That's why Joe Yazzie had disappeared on June 7th, 1953. 2 weeks before the summer solstice. The door had been opening, and he had stepped through, or been pulled through, and he had become part of the threshold himself. Another watcher, another guardian, maintaining the boundary from the other side. I could see him now, or sense him. A presence in the stone, not dead, not alive in the conventional sense, but existing, aware, watching, along with all the others who had made the same choice over the millennia. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all existing in the threshold, all maintaining the boundary, all making sure the door didn't open so wide that causality itself collapsed. I could see the government's involvement too. The classified programs that dated back to the 1940s. Operation Blue Book, Project Sign, and lesser-known programs, deeper programs that dealt not with UFOs, but with temporal anomalies, places where time didn't work correctly. The Department of Energy's work in Nevada wasn't just about atomic weapons. It was also about the way nuclear detonations affected the fabric of space-time, the way they created tiny tears, tiny wounds, tiny doors. And the government had discovered that there were natural places where these doors already existed, places where time pooled and eddied. Tsé Bii Ndzisgaii was one, but there were others. The Bermuda Triangle was one. The Bridgewater Triangle in Massachusetts was one. The Hoya Baciu Forest in Romania was one. Certain areas of the Amazon rainforest were ones. Dozens of places scattered across the globe where the membrane between times was thin, where ancient peoples had built sacred sites, where modern people reported missing time and strange phenomena and equipment malfunctions. And the government had tried to control these sites, had tried to study them, had tried to weaponize them, but they had failed. Because you can't control a door like this with technology. You can't contain it with fences and security clearances and classified documents. The only way to maintain it, to stabilize it, to keep it from tearing reality apart is with consciousness, with intention, with a human being who chooses to stand at the threshold and become the threshold. The indigenous people had known this for thousands of years. The medicine people, the shamans, the spiritual practitioners across cultures. They had known that certain places required guardians, required people who would sacrifice their individual existence to become part of the larger pattern. And they had honored those people, had created ceremonies and songs and stories to remember them, had understood that they weren't gone, weren't dead, but had transformed into something necessary and sacred. And then colonialism had come, and the sacred sites had been desecrated, and the treaties had been broken, and the warnings had been dismissed as superstition. and the doors had become unstable. More unstable with each passing decade as more people came with their machines and their need to measure and quantify and control. The government had noticed, had tried to reestablish control, had tried to create their own guardians, their own watchers. But manufactured consciousness doesn't work. You can't train someone to do this job. You can't assign someone to this duty. They have to choose it. They have to have the gift. They have to be willing to let go of their limited self and expand into something larger. And so, the government had reached an uneasy accommodation with the indigenous communities, had issued permits and created regulations and put up warning signs, had let the traditional guardians do their work while pretending officially that nothing was happening, had classified the real incidents while publishing sanitized versions that attributed everything to natural causes or human error. And the threshold had held. Barely. 4 decades. Barely. But it had held because people like my grandfather had chosen to stand guard, had chosen to transform, had chosen to become the boundary. And now it was my turn. I felt my consciousness spreading, not just across time, but across space. I could feel the entire canyon system, all 420 miles of mapped passages, all the unmapped passages, all the cliff dwellings and the petroglyphs and the buried artifacts, all the water flowing underground, all the roots of the cottonwood trees reaching down to find moisture, all the insects and rodents and ravens and coyotes that made their homes in the canyon. All of it became part of my awareness, not in a confusing, overwhelming rush, but gradually, organically, the way you gradually become aware of your own body as you grow from infant to child to adult. I was learning to inhabit a much larger body, the body of the canyon itself. And as I did, I understood something crucial. This wasn't a punishment. This wasn't a curse. This was an evolution. The human species had developed technology that could tear holes in space-time, nuclear weapons, particle accelerators, quantum computers, artificial intelligence, all of it increasing humanity's power without increasing humanity's wisdom. And something had to balance that. Something had to stand in the gap between what humans could do and what humans should do. The guardians at the threshold were that something. We were the ballast, the counterweight, the consciousness that maintained the boundaries so that human cleverness didn't destroy the fabric of reality itself. This work had always been necessary, but it was becoming more necessary with each passing year, as technology advanced, as the population grew, as more people stumbled accidentally into places where the boundaries were thin. Someone had to watch, someone had to guard, someone had to maintain, and I had chosen to be that someone. Not because I was special, not because I was uniquely qualified, but because I was here, at this moment, at this threshold, with the gift that allowed me to do the work. And that was enough. I opened my eyes. I was still standing in the narrow section of Tsé Bii Ndzisgaii, but I was also standing in every other time and place in the canyon simultaneously. I could see the search and rescue team arriving. I could see them finding Lawrence and Daniel and the 4 others. I could see the confusion and fear on their faces. I could see myself as they would see me, standing in the narrow section, translucent, eyes reflecting light that wasn't coming from any visible source, body partially merged with the canyon wall. I could see Ranger Goodman trying to radio me, trying to make contact, trying to understand what had happened. And I could see myself, or the part of myself that was still capable of existing in single time, stepping forward out of the stone, walking back toward the search party, speaking to them in a voice that sounded almost normal, telling them I had found the missing persons, telling them everyone was alive, telling them we needed to get them out of the canyon before full dark. I could see the version of me that would write a report, that would fill out paperwork, that would testify about what had happened. The official version: heat exhaustion, dehydration, possible hallucinogenic exposure, equipment malfunction causing disorientation, all 6 survivors transported to hospitals, all 6 eventually released, all 6 suffering from PTSD and shared trauma response, all 6 refusing to return to Canyon de Chelly. Case closed. And I could see the truth beneath the official story. The truth that would be known only to those who had stood at the threshold. The truth that Lawrence and Daniel and my family would carry. The truth that Ranger Goodman suspected but could never prove. The truth that government agencies would classify and file away and occasionally reference in internal memos. Officer Thomas Nakai had become a guardian, had chosen to stand at the threshold, had transformed from a man into something larger, was still there, would always be there, maintaining the boundary, keeping the door stable, protecting not just the canyon, but the entire fabric of reality from tearing apart. And the human part of me that loved my family, that wanted to go home, that wanted to hold my daughter and kiss my wife and eat dinner at my mother's table, that part was grieving, would always grieve. But the larger part of me, the part that was now merged with the threshold, the part that could see across time and understand the necessity of the work, that part was at peace. Because I could see them, my family, not just as they were now, but as they would be. I could see Sarah mourning me, then gradually healing, then finding joy again. I could see Nina growing up, becoming a veterinarian like she dreamed, sometimes sensing my presence when she visited the canyon, sometimes talking to me even though she couldn't see me. I could see my mother performing ceremonies for me, knowing in the way that elders know that I wasn't gone, just transformed. I could see them living good lives. And I could see further. I could see the day, 17 years from now, when a young woman would come to the canyon, a young woman with the gift, a young woman who would hear the breathing of the walls and feel the call of the threshold and make the same choice I had made. And I could see myself stepping back from the threshold at that moment, stepping out of the stone, returning to the world of single time, aged by only weeks, even though I had been standing guard for nearly 2 decades, returning to my family who had thought me dead or disappeared, returning changed, transformed, carrying the memory of existing across all times, but returning. That was the mercy of the threshold. That was the gift. Those who stood guard were relieved eventually, were allowed to return, were allowed to live the rest of their lives in normal time. Changed? Yes. Marked? Yes. But alive, present, real. My grandfather had known this, had chosen to remain at the threshold even after his death, because he wanted to guide me, to teach me, to make sure I understood. But he could have stepped back, could have returned to the world, had chosen not to because his time in the world had already ended naturally. I was younger. I would return, eventually, and until then, I would stand guard. I would maintain the boundary. I would breathe in rhythm with the canyon walls. I would exist across all times while anchored in this place. I would watch over the threshold. I would keep the door stable. I would protect the fabric of reality, and that was my duty, my burden, my privilege, my choice. The first few days were the hardest, learning to exist in multiple times simultaneously while still maintaining enough presence in linear time to interact with the search party, to provide testimony, to help carry the 6 survivors out of the canyon. Lawrence and Daniel kept looking at me with knowing eyes. They could see what I had become, or what I was becoming. The transformation wasn't instantaneous. It was gradual, a slow dissolution of the boundary between self and place. By the 3rd day, I was translucent enough that Ranger Goodman noticed. She pulled me aside while the others were loading equipment into vehicles. "Officer Nakai," she said quietly, "I can see through you. Just barely. Just at the edges. Like you're not quite all here anymore." I looked down at my hands. In linear time, the time that most people inhabited, they looked almost normal. But I could see the slight transparency she was talking about, the slight shimmer. "I made a choice," I told her, "at the threshold. My grandfather made the same choice, and his grandfather before him. Someone has to guard it. Someone has to keep it stable. Otherwise," I trailed off. "How do you explain to someone who hasn't stood at the threshold? How do you make them understand?" But Ranger Goodman surprised me. She nodded slowly. "I thought so. I've seen it before. Not here. At other parks, other places where the boundaries are thin. Yellowstone has guardians. So does Death Valley. So does the Everglades. People who just stay. People who become part of the landscape. Who are seen sometimes at twilight or dawn. Walking the same paths. Keeping watch. The old-timers in the Park Service know. We don't talk about it officially, but we know. We leave offerings sometimes. Water. Food. Tobacco. Traditional items. Because we understand that they're doing work we can't do. Work that's necessary. Work that keeps the parks, the wild places, the thin places, from tearing apart completely." She reached into her pack and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in red cloth. "This is from the rangers who know. White sage, cornmeal, turquoise, small things, but tokens of respect. We'll leave them at the entrance to Tsé Bii Ndzisgaii. We'll tell your family you died in the line of duty. That's the official story. But the truth will be known by those who need to know it. And your daughter, when she's old enough, will tell her the real story. We'll tell her that her father didn't die. Her father transformed. Her father became one of the guardians. And that's the highest honor anyone can achieve." I took the bundle. It felt heavy with more than physical weight. It felt heavy with recognition, with acknowledgement, with respect. "Thank you," I said, "for understanding, for keeping the knowledge alive, for honoring the work." "Thank you for doing the work," she replied. "I can't. I don't have the gift. But I can witness. I can remember. I can tell the stories when they need to be told. That's my part. Small, but necessary." We stood there for a moment in silence. Then she returned to the others, and I walked back toward Tsé Bii Ndzisgaii, back toward the narrow section, back toward the threshold. I knew I wouldn't see her again. Not in linear time, but I would see her in the way that guardians see things. I would watch over her when she brought tour groups through the canyon. I would keep her safe. I would make sure the door remained stable when she walked past. That was my job now. My duty. My existence. I reached the narrow section as the sun was setting. The walls turned deep red, then purple, then blue-black. The stars came out. More stars than most people ever see. The Milky Way, a river of light overhead. and I could see the stars not just as they appeared now, but as they had appeared 10,000 years ago, as they would appear 10,000 years from now. The slow wheel of the galaxy turning, the slow death and birth of suns, all of it visible, all of it present, all of it real. I felt my body merge further with the stone, not disappearing, expanding, becoming more than I had been, becoming Thomas Nakai, and also Tsé Bii Ndzisgaii, becoming the individual and also the collective, becoming the guardian. I could feel the other guardians now, not just my grandfather, but all of them. Joe Yazzie from 1953, still here, still watching. The medicine woman from the 1800s, the ancestral Puebloan priest from 1300, the ancient one from 8000 BCE. All of them existing in the threshold, all of them maintaining the boundary, all of them part of the same consciousness, the same work. We were not separate. We were individual and also unified. We were each ourselves and also something larger. We were the threshold itself. And we breathed in rhythm with the canyon walls. In and out, holding the door stable, keeping time from collapsing into chaos, protecting reality. I heard my grandfather's voice one last time. Welcome, grandson. You are home now. You have always been home. This is where you were meant to be. Not forever, but for now. And now is all that matters. Now is all there is. And now extends backward into the infinite past and forward into the infinite future. And you are standing in all of it, experiencing all of it. And that is the gift. That is the burden. That is the work. Welcome. And I understood. This was not a loss. This was a transformation. This was not death. This was expansion. This was not the end of Thomas Nakai. This was Thomas Nakai becoming more than he had been, becoming the guardian, the watcher, the threshold, and I accepted it. Not easily, not without grief for what I was leaving behind, but fully, completely, with all of my being. I had made my choice, and now I would live with it, or through it, or as it, for as long as necessary. 17 years passed, but I experienced them differently than humans experience time. To me, it was simultaneous. I was standing in the threshold on September 18, 2024, the day I fully merged with the canyon. I was also standing in the threshold on June 3rd, 2031, and on every day between, and on every day before, and on every day after. All of it happening at once, all of it equally real. I watched my family from the threshold. Sarah mourned me. The funeral was held 3 weeks after I disappeared. They called it a line of duty death, even though no body was recovered. They said I had fallen into a crevasse while searching for the missing archaeologists. They said the narrow canyon made recovery impossible. It was a lie, but a kind one. Sarah knew the truth, or part of it. Lawrence Begay and Daniel Tsinajini had visited her, had told her I had made a choice, had told her I wasn't dead, had told her I was still in the canyon, still watching, still present in a way that was hard to explain, but real nonetheless. She didn't fully understand. How could she? But she believed, and that was enough. I watched Nina grow up, 7 years old when I transformed, 9, 11, 13, 16, 21. She became a veterinarian, just as she'd dreamed. She moved to Gallup, opened a practice, treated horses and sheep and dogs and cats. She was good at her work, patient and kind and skilled. She married a man from the Zuni Pueblo, a good man, a teacher. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl. My grandchildren, who I would never hold, but who I could see, could watch, could love from the threshold. Nina came to Canyon de Shelly sometimes, not often. It was painful for her. But on my birthday and on the anniversary of my disappearance, she would come to the overlook at Spider Rock and speak to me. She couldn't see me, but she could sense me. She would leave offerings of cornmeal and whiskey and Coca-Cola, my favorite drink. She would tell me about her life, about her children, about her work, and I would listen. I couldn't respond in words, but I could send her feelings: warmth, love, pride, reassurance. She would stand at the railing, looking out over the canyon, and sometimes tears would run down her face, and sometimes she would smile. And then she would leave, return to her life, return to the world of linear time, and I would remain. Sarah remarried after 5 years. I was happy for her. She married a man named Robert Tso, a teacher at the high school in Chinle, a widower with teenage children. It was a good marriage. Robert was kind to her. They were happy together. They had a life together. And I was glad. I didn't want her to spend her existence mourning me. I wanted her to live. And she did. My mother understood better than either of them. She was old when I transformed, in her 70s. She lived another 7 years, until 2031. In those years, she performed ceremonies at Tsé Bii Ndzisgaii. She left offerings. She sang the old songs. She taught the younger medicine people about the threshold, about the guardians, about the work. When she died, I felt it. I felt her spirit pass through the threshold. She paused there, at the boundary, and I felt her presence, felt her recognition. "My son," she said, without words, "you did well. You honored the old ways. You protected the people. Your duty is almost complete. Someone is coming. Someone who will relieve you. You will return. You will see your grandchildren. You will live the rest of your life in the world of linear time, but changed, always changed, marked by what you've seen, carrying the knowledge, teaching it to those who come after. That is also part of the work, not just standing guard, but returning to testify, to teach, to pass on the knowledge. Your grandfather did not return because his time in the world had ended, but yours is not. You will return." And then she passed on into whatever comes after, and I was alone again. Alone, but not alone. Surrounded by the other guardians, the other watchers, the collective consciousness that maintained the threshold. Jo Yazi, who had been here since 1953. The medicine woman from the 1800s, whose name I learned was Desba. The ancestral Puebloan priest, whose name was something I couldn't pronounce, but felt as a pattern, a rhythm, a vibration. The ancient one from 8000 BCE, who had no name in any language but existed as pure presence. We were the guardians. We were the threshold. We were time itself made conscious and intentional. And we kept the door stable. Kept it from opening so wide that all the times would collapse into each other. Kept it from tearing reality apart. The years passed. 2024, 2025, 2030, 2035, 2040. I watched the world change. Climate change accelerated. The Southwest got hotter, drier. The canyon ecosystem shifted. Some species disappeared. New species arrived. The human population grew. More tourists came to Canyon de Chelly. More people with cameras and drones and virtual reality equipment. More people trying to document, to capture, to own the experience. And the threshold remained stable. Because we were watching. Because we were maintaining it. Because we had made the choice to stand in the gap. I saw the government's efforts to study the threshold. New technology, more sophisticated than the ground-penetrating radar and photogrammetry that Dr. Webb's team had brought. quantum sensors, temporal mapping devices, equipment designed to measure fluctuations in space-time. They came in 2027, a team from DARPA and Los Alamos. They had the highest clearances, the best equipment, the smartest scientists. They lasted 3 hours in Tsé Bii Ndzisgaii before their equipment started malfunctioning. GPS units showing impossible coordinates, clocks running backwards, cameras capturing images from different time periods overlaid on each other. One scientist, a woman in her 30s, named Dr. Keisha Williams, saw me, saw my translucent form standing in the stone, saw my eyes reflecting light from all the different times. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she slowly, deliberately, turned off all her equipment. She walked over to where I stood, or where she could see I stood, and she knelt. "I understand," she said quietly. "I don't know how this works. I don't know the mechanism, but I understand the function. You're maintaining the boundary. You're keeping this place stable. And my equipment, our technology, it's destabilizing it, making your job harder. So I'm going to recommend that we leave, that we classify this site as too sensitive for study, that we accept there are some things we can't measure, can't understand, can only respect and leave alone." She stood up. She gathered her team. She left. And 3 months later, Tsé Bii Ndzisgaii was designated a restricted area. No permits issued for any kind of scientific study. Traditional access for Navajo religious practices only. The government had decided, officially, that the site was too culturally sensitive to disturb. Unofficially, they had added it to a list of locations where space-time anomalies made standard research impossible and potentially dangerous. Dr. Williams understood. And because she understood, because she respected the boundary, the threshold remained stable. That was the work. Not preventing all human contact, but preventing the kind of contact that would tear the door open completely. Traditional practices that honored the threshold were fine, were welcome, were part of maintaining the balance. It was the modern need to measure, to quantify, to control, that was dangerous. That put pressure on the threshold. That threatened to collapse the boundary. And as the years passed, I learned to better distinguish between the two. I learned to recognize the people who came to the canyon with respect, with humility, with an openness to mystery. Those people could walk right past me, could stand at the threshold, could even glimpse the overlapping times, and the door would remain stable. But people who came with arrogance, with the assumption that everything could be explained and measured and owned, those people put pressure on the threshold. Those people I had to turn away. Not physically. I couldn't physically stop anyone. But I could make the canyon unwelcoming. I could intensify the feeling of wrongness. I could make the walls seem to breathe more obviously. I could make the temperature drop suddenly. I could make shadows move independent of their sources. Small things, subtle things, enough to make people uncomfortable, enough to make them leave. Most of them thought it was their imagination. Some of them thought it was the wind or the light playing tricks. A few of them suspected the truth, that the canyon was aware, that the canyon was watching, that the canyon didn't want them there. And they were right. Not the canyon itself, which was just stone and sand and water and wind, but me, the guardian, the threshold made conscious. I didn't want them there. And so they left, and the threshold remained stable, year after year after year, until 2041, until June 12th, 2041, until the day she came. I felt her before I saw her, a resonance, a frequency that matched my own. Someone with a gift, someone who could see across time, someone who could exist in multiple moments simultaneously without losing themselves, someone who could become a guardian. She was young, 23 years old, Navajo, from Tiknospos. Her name was Lily Nez. She had come to Canyon de Chelly, not as a tourist, but as a seeker. She had been having dreams. Dreams of standing in a narrow canyon with breathing walls. Dreams of a man made of stone and light. Dreams of a choice she would have to make. She walked into Tsé Bii Ndzisgaii in the early morning, alone, carrying only a water bottle and a bundle of cornmeal. She wore traditional clothing, a long skirt and velvet blouse, turquoise jewelry. Her hair was long and dark, pulled back in a bun. She moved with confidence, but also reverence. She knew this was a sacred place. And when she reached the narrow section, when she stood at the threshold, she stopped. She looked up at the canyon walls. She saw the moving petroglyphs. She saw the overlapping times. And she saw me. "Hello," she said quietly. "I've been dreaming of you for 6 months. I didn't know if you were real. I thought maybe I was going crazy. But you're real, aren't you? You're the guardian. You're the one who keeps the door stable." I stepped forward out of the stone. Or I intensified my presence in linear time enough that I could speak. My voice was strange, layered with harmonics, but she didn't flinch. "Yes," I said, "I am the guardian. I have been standing here since 2024, 17 years in the world of linear time, much longer in the time of the threshold, and you are my relief. You are the one who has come to take over the work. If you choose to, the choice is always yours. You can turn around. You can walk away. You can live your life in the world of single time. Or you can step forward. You can accept the burden. You can become the guardian. And I can return. I can go back to my family. I can live the rest of my life in the world. Changed, but present. Alive, but marked. That is the choice. The same choice I made. The same choice all the guardians before me have made. What do you choose?" Lily stood very still. She looked up at the walls. She looked at the moving petroglyphs. She looked at me, translucent and strange and existing at all times at once. "I don't have family," she said quietly. "My parents died when I was young. My grandparents raised me, but they passed away last year. I have cousins, friends, but no one who depends on me. No one who would mourn me the way your family mourned you. I've always felt not quite here, not quite present in the world, like I was waiting for something, like there was work I was meant to do that I couldn't name. And then the dreams started, and I understood. This is the work. This is what I've been waiting for. So yes, I choose to step forward. I choose to become the guardian. I choose to accept the burden. Tell me what I need to do." Relief washed over me. Not just relief that I could return, though that was part of it, but relief that the work would continue, that the threshold would remain guarded, that someone with the gift had chosen to accept the duty. I taught her, not with words. Words are too slow, too linear. I taught her by merging our consciousness temporarily, by showing her how to exist in multiple times simultaneously, by showing her how to breathe in rhythm with the canyon walls, by showing her how to dissolve the boundary between self and place, by showing her how to become the threshold. It took 3 days, or it took 3 minutes, or it took 3 years. Time was flexible here, remember? But by the end of the teaching, she understood. She knew how to do the work. She was ready. You will not be alone, I told her. The other guardians are here. Joe Yazi, Desba, the ancestral Puebloan priest, the ancient one. They will guide you. They will support you. And in time, another will come. And you will return, as I am returning. This is not forever. This is for as long as necessary, until someone comes to relieve you. And then you will go back to the world, changed, but present. That is the promise. That is the gift. You will not be trapped here forever. You will serve your time, and then you will return. I understand, Lily said, and I accept. She stepped forward. She placed her hands on the canyon walls, and the handprint appeared on her chest, the cold spreading, the transformation beginning. I watched her for a moment. I watched her begin to become translucent. I watched her consciousness expand. I watched her merge with the threshold. And then I stepped back. For the first time in 17 years, I stepped back from the threshold. I felt my consciousness contract, not painfully, but noticeably, like putting on a heavy coat after being naked, like stepping from a bright room into a dim one. I was becoming singular again, becoming Thomas Nakai only, not Thomas Nakai and the canyon, becoming present in one time only, not all times simultaneously. It felt strange, limiting, but also restful. I walked out of Tsé Bii Ndzisgaii. I walked through the narrow section, through the wider canyon, past the cottonwood trees, toward the trail that would take me to the rim. The sun was rising. The sky was the pale blue of early morning. Birds were singing. The air smelled of sage and dust. I climbed the trail slowly. My body was weak. 17 years had passed in the world, but I had experienced them differently, and my body hadn't aged in the normal way. I was still 38 years old physically, but I felt older. I felt the weight of all the time I had witnessed, all the moments I had experienced, all the knowledge I now carried. When I reached the rim, Ranger Goodman was waiting. Except it wasn't Ranger Goodman anymore. She was older now, in her 70s, retired. But she came to the canyon every morning at sunrise, just in case. She saw me emerge from the canyon trail. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she smiled. "Officer Nakai," she said, "welcome back. You've been gone 17 years in our time, but you look like you've only been gone a few weeks. That's the way of it, isn't it? The threshold plays tricks with time, but you're back now. You're really back." "I'm back," I said. My voice was rough from disuse, or from use in ways that weren't quite speech. "Someone came to relieve me. Lily Nez, from Tiknos Pos. She's the new guardian. She'll keep the threshold stable. She'll do the work. And you're free," Ranger Goodman said. "Free to return to your family. Free to live the rest of your life. Changed, but free." "Changed," I agreed. "Always changed. I can still see the other times if I choose to. I can still feel the threshold, but I'm not bound to it anymore. I'm not part of it anymore. I'm just Thomas Nakai again, or as close to just Thomas Nakai as I can ever be again." She handed me a phone, a modern smartphone, much more advanced than the one I'd carried in 2024. "Call your daughter," she said. "Call Nina. She comes to the canyon on your birthday every year, the anniversary of your disappearance. She leaves offerings. She speaks to you. She'll want to know you're back. She'll want to see you." I took the phone. I dialed the number she gave me. It rang twice. Then a woman's voice, familiar but older, answered. "Hello?" "Nina," I said. "It's me. It's your father. I'm back." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. then crying, then laughter, then more crying, then questions. So many questions. I told her I would explain everything. Told her to meet me at the Spider Rock Overlook. Told her I loved her. Told her I had never stopped loving her, even when I was standing in the threshold. Even when I was existing in all time simultaneously, she had always been in my heart. She arrived 2 hours later. She was 24 years old now, the same age I had been when she was born. A grown woman, a veterinarian, married, a mother. She looked like her mother, like Sarah, but with my eyes, my bone structure. She ran to me and hugged me, and we both cried, and neither of us could speak for several minutes. Finally, she pulled back and looked at me, really looked at me. "You don't look older," she said. "You look exactly the same as the day you disappeared. How is that possible?" "Time works differently at the threshold," I said. "I was there for 17 years in the world's time. But for me, it was both longer and shorter. I experienced all the time simultaneously, and my body didn't age the way it would have if I'd been living in linear time. It's hard to explain, but I'm back now. I'm here now, and I want to meet my grandchildren. I want to be part of your life again, if you'll let me." "Of course I'll let you," she said, crying again. "Of course I will. You're my father. You've always been my father. Even when you were gone, even when we thought you were dead, I felt you watching. I felt you present. And now you're really here, really back. We have so much to catch up on, so much to tell each other. And yes, you need to meet your grandchildren, Jacob and Lily. They're 3 in 1. They're beautiful. They're perfect. And they need to know their grandfather." We sat on the rim of Canyon de Chelly for hours, talking. I told her about the threshold, about what it had been like to exist in all time simultaneously, about the other guardians, about the work, about why it was necessary. And she listened. She believed. She understood. She had always understood, even as a child, even when I had tried to protect her from the knowledge. She had her grandfather's gift, my gift, the ability to see more than she should. "Will it happen to me someday?" she asked. "Will I be called to become a guardian?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "The gift runs in families, but not everyone who has the gift chooses to become a guardian. And not everyone is called. Lily Nez will stand at the threshold for years, maybe decades. By the time she needs to be relieved, you might be too old, or someone else might be called. There's no way to know. The threshold calls who it needs when it needs them. All you can do is live your life, raise your children, do your work, and if the call comes, then you'll have to decide. But that's in the future, uncertain, unwritten. For now, just live. Be present. Be here." She nodded. She understood. Then we drove back to Gallup, back to her home, back to meet her family. Robert, her husband, was wary at first. How could he not be? A man who had been gone for 17 years, who looked exactly the same as the day he disappeared, showing up, claiming to be his wife's father. It was bizarre. It was impossible. But Nina vouched for me. And slowly, Robert accepted. And I met my grandchildren. Jacob, 3 years old, serious and curious. Lily, 1 year old, named after the woman who had relieved me at the threshold, though Nina didn't know that yet. I held them. I played with them. I was present in their lives in a way I hadn't been able to be present for anyone for 17 years. And it was beautiful and painful and overwhelming and exactly what I needed. I stayed with them for 3 months, learning to exist in linear time again, learning to be just a man, just a grandfather, just a person, instead of a guardian, a threshold, a consciousness spread across all times. It was an adjustment. Sometimes I would wake up at 3:33 a.m., feeling the pull of the canyon, feeling the breathing of the walls, feeling the need to return to the threshold. But Lily was there. Lily was doing the work. I didn't need to go back. So I would sit on the porch of Nina's house, looking up at the stars, feeling the connection, but not acting on it, letting it be. After 3 months, I moved into my own place in Gallup, a small house near Nina's. I got a job teaching cultural awareness classes at the police academy in Artesia, teaching young officers about Navajo culture, about respecting sacred sites, about understanding that there are some things in the world that can't be measured or controlled or explained, but that are real nonetheless and deserve respect. I didn't tell them about the threshold. I didn't tell them about the guardians. That knowledge was too dangerous for those who weren't ready. But I taught them to listen, to observe, to respect, to understand that their job wasn't to have all the answers, but to protect and serve even when they didn't understand. And some of them heard what I wasn't saying. Some of them had the gift. Some of them saw more than they should. And to those students, in private conversations, I would tell more. I would tell them about places where the boundaries were thin, about the need for guardians, about the work that had been done for thousands of years by people who sacrificed themselves to maintain the fabric of reality. And some of them understood, and some of them would go on to become guardians themselves at other thresholds, in other places. That was part of the work too. Not just standing at the threshold, but teaching others about it, preparing the next generation, making sure the knowledge didn't die. Sarah and I never reconnected romantically. Too much time had passed. She had built a new life with Robert Tsé. They were happy. I didn't want to disrupt that. But we became friends. We would have coffee sometimes, talk about Nina, talk about the grandchildren, talk about our lives. She knew what I had done, where I'd been, and she respected it. You did what you had to do, she told me once. You protected everyone. You made a sacrifice that most people can't even imagine. I'm proud of you. I'll always love you. But that part of our lives is over. We're different people now, and that's okay. And it was okay. Painful, but okay. Necessary, but okay. The truth, but okay. I lived in Gallup for 7 years, teaching, being present for my grandchildren, learning to be fully human again. And then my mother's words came back to me. The words she had spoken at the threshold, not just standing guard, but returning to testify, to teach, to pass on the knowledge. That is also part of the work. And I understood what I had to do. I had to tell the story, not to everyone, not to the masses who wouldn't believe, who would dismiss it as fiction or delusion or clever storytelling, but to those who needed to hear it, to those who sensed the truth, to those who stood at their own thresholds, metaphorical or literal, and needed to know they weren't alone. So I'm telling you now. I'm telling you what happened at Tsé Bii Ndzisgaii. I'm telling you about the threshold, about the guardians, about the work. I'm telling you because some of you need to hear it. Some of you have felt the pull of the thin places. Some of you have stood in locations where time didn't work right, where the walls seemed to breathe, where the boundaries felt permeable. Some of you have the gift, and some of you will be called. And when that call comes, you'll need to make a choice. You can close your eyes, You can walk away. You can live your life in the world of single time. Or you can step forward. You can accept the burden. You can become the guardian. The choice is always yours. But know this: the work is real. The threshold is real. The guardians are real. We stand between the world as most people know it and the deeper, stranger truth of how reality actually functions. We maintain the boundaries. We keep time from collapsing into chaos. We do the work that has been done for thousands of years, and we will continue to do it because it is necessary, because someone must, because we choose to. My name is Thomas Nakai. I am 45 years old now, though I look 38. I served as a guardian at Tsé Bii Ndzisgaii from 2024 to 2041, 17 years in the world's time, much longer in the time of the threshold. I was relieved by Lily Nez, who stands there still, who will stand there until someone comes to relieve her. I return to the world. I live in Gallup, New Mexico. I teach at the police academy. I am a grandfather. I am alive. I am present. But I am also forever marked by what I experienced. I can still see the other times if I choose to. I can still feel the threshold. I can still hear the breathing of the canyon walls. I am both Thomas Nakai and something more than Thomas Nakai. I am the watcher who returned. And I am telling you this story because you need to hear it. Because the world needs guardians. Because the thin places need protection. Because reality is more fragile and more flexible than most people understand. And because the old ways, the traditional knowledge, the indigenous wisdom that has been dismissed as superstition for centuries, is actually a field manual for maintaining the infrastructure of existence itself. Listen to the elders. Respect the sacred sites. Understand that some places are holy, not because God walked there, but because the boundaries are thin there, because time pools and eddies there, because those places require guardians. And if you feel the call, if you stand at a threshold and feel it breathing, if you sense that you have the gift, then you'll have to decide. Stay in the line or become the circle. Remain in one time or exist in all times. Close your eyes or open them all the way. The choice is yours. It has always been yours. But know that whatever you choose, you are not alone. The guardians are there. We have always been there. We will always be there. Watching. Maintaining. Protecting. Doing the work for as long as necessary. If you're watching this from anywhere near Canyon de Chelly, if you're planning to visit, if you feel pulled to the narrow canyons and the red rock walls, be respectful. Leave offerings. Speak your truth. Honor the land. And if you happen to see a translucent figure standing in the stone, if you see someone who looks like they're existing in multiple times simultaneously, don't be afraid. That's just the guardian. That's just someone doing the most important work in the world. That's just someone keeping the door stable, keeping reality intact, keeping time from devouring itself. Thank them, honor them, and leave them to their work, because that work protects everyone, even those who don't know it's being done, even those who will never believe it's real, even those who dismiss it as story. The work continues. The guardians watch. The threshold holds. Time isn't a line. It's a web. And the guardians are the ones who maintain the structure of that web, who keep the threads from tangling, who prevent the pattern from collapsing. That is the truth my grandfather tried to teach me when I was 7 years old. That is the truth I learned at the threshold. That is the truth I'm passing on to you now. Welcome to Canyon de Chelly. Welcome to Tsé Bii Ndzisgaii. Welcome to the threshold. The stone remembers everything. Time isn't a line, and the old warnings were real. They've always been real, and they will always be real, for as long as the canyon stands, for as long as time flows, for as long as guardians choose to stand watch. This is my testimony. This is my truth. This is my story. And now it's yours.